Welcome to this episode of The World According to Irina Tsukerman, our very special series on global politics on the KAJ Masterclass Live. Irina Tsukerman is a US based national security and human rights lawyer as well as a renowned geopolitical analyst. Her writings and commentary have appeared in diverse US and international media and have been translated to over a dozen languages. Every fortnight in The World According to Irina Tsukerman, we traverse the geopolitical landscape and delve into pressing international issues and gain insight from Irina's expert perspective. Welcome to the show once again, Irina.
Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here as always.
You're welcome. Welcome to the show once again. Several big topics today, again, Irina, and the big one is the just ended Trump Harris debate. Tell us a bit about this. Has it ended or is it still going on?
No, thankfully it ended already. Although, of course, the post debate discussions continue.
Right. So what should we understand? Means what was this whole debate? What is the takeaway for the world? Because you see, by uh, Trump says she is Biden, and he wants does not wants to make sure that there is no erasure of any policy distinction between Harris and Biden. And then Harris says, "I am not Joe Biden, and I am certainly not Donald Trump." Help us understand how should people understand about this debate. What was discussed in this whole debate?
So I think Kamala Harris failed in trying to distinguish herself from Biden, but also think Trump failed to really change anyone's mind about himself, if that was his goal at all. I think he did a number of attacks on Kamala Harris's positions that were fairly successful, but otherwise he came across as very angry. He repeated the same points about immigration and border security. It was a valid point, but at appropriate times, not constantly. He came across as an unprepared and um, got basically became very reactive to baiting by Kamala Harris. She, on the other hand, dodged. He also engaged in a lot of hyperbole and conspiracy theories. She, on the other hand, dodged or did not answer a lot of the questions. And her attacks on Trump were better than her defense of her own record. So they talked about several themes, including the economy, where both of them actually missed a lot of opportunity to really explain their positions to the public. They made disjointed points. Trump relied heavily on his past record, but they did not really explain to the public what their plan is for the future, other than certain concrete things. Kamala Harris tried to push her idea that would support small businesses, but that her excessive spending appears to nullify any positive um, steps she might be taking. Trump um, did not really convince anyone that his plan to impose tariffs on all imports from all countries would not in fact end up costing the consumers more in the market. Neither of them really created uh, a very long-term vision of the U.S. economy and how they would combat inflation. Neither of them could define inflation. On Ukraine, this difference between the two candidates was the biggest. Trump refused to um, unequivocally support Ukraine's victory. He pushed for a diplomatic solution to the crisis, but did not appear an effective argument about overcoming the stark differences in the two positions of the countries. And he did not also commit to cutting aid to Ukraine, but nor providing aid to Ukraine. So we can only assume that either his expectations are completely unrealistic, or he is not being transparent about what he's actually planning to do. Harris was more clear in her position of appearing to continue to provide support to Ukraine. Neither had very good answer for the Middle East crisis or questions about the hostage situation, but Trump did point to his previous record of success in the Middle East, at least in deterring bad actors from causing problems. Harris gave a very vague and broad answer about supporting Israel's right to self defense, but also balancing it with the putting pressure on Israel over the way it conducts war without giving any clear examples. So it could mean anything and nothing at all, and it did not really satisfy anybody who was expecting anything more concrete. There was a talk about abortions, where once again, Trump was relatively clear in the fact that his issue reserved this issue as a states' right issue, whereas Kamala Harris simply refused to answer whether she would impose any restrictions on abortion. She also could not really defend her border security record or really distance herself from most of Biden's policy successfully. But Trump engaged in completely ludicrous comments, such as insisting that he won the 2020 elections or claiming that the new Haitian refugees entering the U.S. are abducting and eating um, pets from residents in Springfield, Ohio. That is an absolutely absurd theory with no evidence whatsoever, and not one specific example of such an incident occurring. Only unsubstantiated anonymous reports that emerged from Russian linked actors and sources. So I thought that really brought him down, but ultimately, I think both candidates showed very poor leadership. Um, Harris tried to provide a more optimistic vision of the U.S. Trump kept telling, talking about how the Biden administration destroyed the country, but at the end of the day, I don't think either of them really changed anyone's mind or brought anything new that would convince independent voters. But certainly, I don't think Trump's rants or personal attacks or conspiracy theories helped his case at all.
Right, right. So who is a winner this time? Earlier on, in during Trump and Biden, it was Trump, and then Biden
I
bowed out of the race.
Personally, I don't think there were any winners here because Kamala Harris failed in her goal in showing herself as having anything distinctive from Biden, which is what she needed to do to overcome her falling numbers and support. And Trump really did not position himself very well due to his angry outbursts and basically crazy talk. Many people are uh, giving this debate point to Kamala Harris simply because she did not engage in that same level of hyperbole or outright fabrications. But I really don't think that, in terms of the impact of the election, it will have any, and it will not benefit, I don't think, any party. I think there was nothing new to be gained from this debate in terms of clarifying. Um, Either candidate's position on anything. So if that was the impact that election this was supposed to have, it will not. I think. The Republicans who are planning to vote for Trump, even if they think he did a worse job, will still vote for him. I think independents. Uh, mm, will rally over whatever they think is their favorite cause or issue, regardless of what they thought of the rhetoric of these two individuals. I don't think either of them was very impressive.
Right, right. So for someone who is sitting here in this part of the world, how who should he understand who is the front runner right now, and Putin's positive comments on Kamala Harris, do you think it will help her in any way?
I think they're still running neck to neck. I think their numbers very close, which is why so many people were hopeful that this debate would clarify and their positions and help make up the mind. But I don't think you could say who you could argue over who was the better debater. You can criticize Trump for his rankings and Kamala Harris for her nervousness, but at the end of the day, neither of them actually added anything new in terms of substance. I think whatever impressions people will make of them will be purely based on their style and based on who they think was just a better debater, and not on their actual positions. I think in terms of that, they did a much better job attacking each other than actually defending their own positions and visions. And I really don't think either of them has a clear plan for many of the issues they discussed, such as healthcare, such as a lot of the foreign policy. It was very, very worrisome, both for the U.S. voters and for anyone watching it, because if the main the for most of the world, I don't think cares much about how U.S. decides its issue on abortions or healthcare. They care about security, foreign policy, economic and energy policies, but um, much of that remained very vague, broad, and it's not clear what will happen once either candidate takes office.
Right, right. From there, let's move on to the Gaza humanitarian pause about this. If I understand, there is a missile attack again. So how should we look at it? Is the pause working, or is there, is it not working? And where do we go from here? Any positive influence coming in here?
So the humanitarian pause was allegedly for a polio vaccine campaign after one child in Gaza was diagnosed with polio, despite the fact that within the last few years there was a major campaign to vaccinate um, Gaza residents, and over 2 million people were vaccinated. But there were new births since then, and during the war, um, there was no previous opportunity to vaccinate those children who were born after those other vaccination campaigns were complete. So Israel agreed to a partial humanitarian pause, which meant that they will leave portions of the day free from attacks to continue with these vaccinations. However, I'm not entirely sure that this went as as Israel would expect it to, because I think that while it may be a legitimate humanitarian reason, Hamas may not necessarily be using it in a legitimate way. I think they were able to regroup in some way, and despite defense ministers, defense minister comments that Hamas is no longer able to form military formations. Um, it was able to fire rockets, which means they're not all out of weapons, and they're still able to engage in a high level activity and not merely localized attacks.
And what about peace? Does peace have a chance in here after this humanitarian pause working, polio working? Uh, so many. What does humanity stand? Means does it work here or not? Will we get peace in the near term, or should we have to? Do we have to wait for a long term?
Um, Actually, all the negotiators are increasingly pessimistic about any sort of outcome. Hamas is demanding a permanent ceasefire, but let's not forget that they violated the so called permanent ceasefire by attacking on October 7th. Now, they will have no incentive for a ceasefire, because they know that if they release the hostages, there will be nothing preventing Israel from killing all their commanders and destroying their military infrastructure completely. For now, they're able to recruit more followers, even if they denied access to additional new weapons. So I don't think they ever had any intention of a ceasefire. I think they just want Israel to withdraw and to put psychological pressure inside Israel on families and friends and many people emotionally affected by the fates of the hostages and who are not necessarily thinking about the repercussions of releasing thousands of terrorists in exchange for an unknown number of live hostages. And let's remember that Yahya Sinwar, the new political bureau chief and the mastermind of October 7th attack, was actually released in a similar exchange for Gilad Shalit, who was just one person exchanged for over 1,000 Hamas and other terrorist prisoners. And Sinwar emerged to learn from his experience, to learn Hebrew, to understand Israeli mentality, and to help plot a more successful attack. So this is a major concern for the Israeli government. It's a major dilemma, and I think the chances that any such deal with Hamas would ever work, even if it was by some miracle completed, are slim to none.
Right, right. Now let's move on to Ukraine. Chances of a government reshuffle going on, and amidst this, U.S. The Ukraine uh, army has been able to break through the Pokrovsk siege. Help us understand what's going on in Ukraine, and before, especially before the president's U.S. visit.
Essentially, there are different ways of interpreting the same phenomena. The government position is that they want to infuse new energy into the cabinet. Other sources claim that it's due to the ineffectiveness of some people that they're being removed. But let's make it clear, none of these people are actually leaving the government completely. They're moving to different positions. And two of the people actually who was out of six who were supposed to resign were retained by the parliament, which voted to not take up their resignation letters. Others are going to be placed in other positions, such as the foreign minister, who is supposed to be now in charge of negotiating with NATO. Um, Essentially, also, the president of the country is going to be visiting the US and wants a new team in place for that visit, during which he is expected to announce a 4-point plan for victory, long awaited by many different parties.
Right, right. And amidst this, you see Ukrainian drones, they reached close to Moscow, one building they were able to destroy. A woman died, if I understand. So, what does this mean? Is this fight going towards more escalation because Russia is going to retaliate? Or when amidst all these things there are also peace talks, rumors of that there can be chances of peace in the near future. How do you see this drone attacks close? Is Ukraine gaining strength, or is Russia becoming weaker?
Well, actually, one of the reasons there's a cabinet reshuffle is that the president was not satisfied with the political response to the new Russian offensive in that area near Pokrovsk, where Ukraine was losing ground. So I think it wants a more aggressive plan towards um, retaking its own territory, but also towards continuing successful attacks that challenge Russia on its own turf. And I think one thing that could be a groundbreaking development is if, as it is expected, US and UK will finally allow um, Ukraine to use American and European missiles, long range missiles, into Russian territory. Netherlands already allowed all of announced that it will be giving Ukraine permission to even use its F-16s inside Russia's territory. Now, what this means is that while Ukraine may not necessarily be able to respond directly to the offensive in Ukraine, it can damage enough of Russian factories and other economic and war fueling locations that in the long term, Russia's capabilities to continue delivering equipment will be degraded to the point that it will not be able to supply its forces, and they will essentially run out of ammunition and run out of necessities to continue advancing.
Right, right, Irina. And talking of Ukraine drones in Russia, let's talk about someone who, a Japanese spy, supposedly a Japanese national, has been arrested in Belarus. Apparently, that's what they claim, and it's rumored that he took down Russian drones down there. So help us understand, why did Belarus get into arresting a Japanese national?
Quite frankly, this has been a very convenient excuse to accuse foreign nationals of espionage and use them basically as human hostages to put pressure on Japan, which has been very much increasingly assisting Ukraine in this war. Actually, there's been some analysts who claim that Belarus was the one taking down some of the Russian drones around its territory. And that there are tensions between Belarus and Russia. Russia wants Belarus to be much more involved and to attack Ukraine directly. Belarus is concerned about that happening, but a win-win for Russia and Ukraine is taking this Japanese individual and that's who was probably a journalist or some sort of uh, you know um, a scientist who was there for business, and to turn him into a spy in a very unlikely manner. It's very doubtful that one person would have been capable of taking down drones with no support whatsoever and without really spending extensive time infiltrating the local territories and understanding the military landscape and location of the area. He would also really stand out. It would make no sense for the international community to hire someone Japanese when there would be likely volunteers from the Belarusian opposition who would would be in a much better position to do so.
Absolutely. Now, from that part of the world to this part of the world, our Prime Minister, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he visited Singapore and Brunei very recently, especially Singapore. How do you see this particular visit, especially in the backdrop of a lot of tensions in that area?
Well, for India, first of all, it's looking to build up its alliances in the region, Indo-Pacific. It's challenging China for leadership among Asian countries. It's also providing an alternative and reassurances to countries that have been increasingly pushed by China to cooperate in both economic and defense arenas. Singapore is one of the countries which is, while it's relatively neutral politically, economically, there's a growing Chinese influence. And for India, preventing that is a key point, even as China is actually announcing cooperation with India and Russia in far off projects such as potential nuclear reactor on the moon. Whether or not that will come to
Right.
pass remains to be seen. But when it comes to closer neighborhoods, I think there's a lot of distrust between China and India that is not easy to overcome. But even leaving China aside, I think India in general is looking for opportunities to cooperate economically with highly developed neighbors such as Singapore, and there is a lot of technical and economic and other knowledge base to be exchanged. So that is a potentially lucrative and growing partnership.
Right, right. And as we are talking about Southeast Asia, you know, and China's leadership was in Africa, China Africa Summit. And there, the leadership announced 1 million jobs for Africa. Help us understand about this China Africa Summit we just concluded, and especially with this offer of 1 million jobs in Africa. What do they want out of Africa? They should be focusing more on this part of the world if they are if there is so much of tension in this part of the world.
Well, China wants one main thing out of Africa, and that is its natural resources. But even African leaders have started wisening up to the really unequal relationship between China and these countries, where China essentially exploits the local climate. They bring their own workers, and there's not much long-term benefit to those countries. The benefit, but the benefit is mostly to the local leaders, and but not to the local communities. And I think they're starting to push back, especially as competition with other countries is heating up. Middle powers like Turkey, Iran, UAE are becoming more active in Africa as well. The United States is pouring resources into projects such as projects in Angola. So there's a lot going on, and I think the African leaders are becoming better positioned. To negotiate and to try to get something more concrete out of China, other than loans that are not always easy to repay for a variety of reasons. And actually, interestingly, it's worth looking at what type of jobs China is promising. One of the major industries that is to be affected by this new push by China is the so-called green energy, green transformation into green technologies, which is kind of ironic because China is actually opening up more coal plants than ever before, but at the same time investing heavily into green technologies, green energy projects, and diversifying it's in both its own sources of energy and investments abroad. So the fact that it's pushing those projects in Africa is interesting. Whether that's actually going to work out remains to be seen. We are seeing the collapse of the EV industries around the world. China's been actually slightly doing somewhat better because they have direct source to some of the components for the EVs, and they're selling them at much cheaper prices and flooding markets with the EVs. But in the United States, the EV market is collapsing, and it remains to be seen whether China's strategy will pay off, or whether at some point um, the green transformation will be just too pricey to actually make it worthwhile either for China or for the Africans.
Right, right. Let's now again look at India and the neighborhood, and there we talk about Bangladesh. A lot of backlash, anti-India backlash in Bangladesh after this whole political thing happening, and and the new administration has voiced their disapproval of Hasina staying in India, making comments. How do you see all this, in especially in the neighborhood perspective as well as global perspective? How should India handle this?
I think it's a it's um it's facing a very sensitive moment. Sheikha Hasna was I call her the Mubarak of Bangladesh, essentially a leader who was just okay enough to deal with because the alternatives appeared to be so much worse, but who also invited the very same problems she was supposed to stop. Specifically, we're talking about Chinese influence and Islamists, both of whom were embedding their influence in Bangladesh, even as she was supposed to be the bulwark against them, and even took nominal steps to oppose them on a political level, which actually ultimately, that strategy ultimately backfired. It was actually her ban over an Islamist party that cost her her position. After allowing these types of groups to proliferate without much pushback for so long, she fell victim and had to flee the country because of the um, opposition to that ban after even attempt on her life. So now we are seeing that these groups are highly energized, highly mobilized. They're trying to surround the acting prime minister and put pressure. And China, of course, is trying to use its opportunity to go well beyond economic and defense sector cooperation and essentially exercise influence of the country much the way it has tried to meddle with Sri Lanka and the Maldives, and to cause the same sort of encirclement of India, and via these smaller neighboring countries. So for India, it's a very sensitive thing. I think the natural instinct of the media is to play up these radical groups, but I think for India, this is an opportunity to highlight the fate of the Hindu minorities that have been suffering, to talk about the economic grievances that resulted not only from Sheikh Hasina's poor policies, which indeed were poor, but also from the economic plans by these groups, and to basically strengthen a support from more moderate, more liberalizing and reforming influences to counter these highly disadvantageous movements that are now taking place. And I think, um, I think it will be reluctant to back away fully from its support from Sheikh Hasna, but it's also fairly obvious that her ability to influence the turn of events is very unlikely, and the best way to go is to find someone who will be much more aggressive in opposing these groups, and much more likely to be seen as a real uh, as a real and full-fledged ally. And I think it's possible. It happened in Egypt. The Sisi emerged out of his disillusionment with the Muslim Brotherhood, and I think uh, such people who are disillusioned with with what China or the radical ideologies have to offer may actually end up being better than Sheikh Hasna in the long run.
Right, right. And our last topic of the day, Irina, is Pakistan is a lot in news. A Pakistan man has been arrested in Canada for allegedly plotting terror attacks on Jews in New York. And at the same time, in Pakistan, arrest of ex-spy chief. It is raising a lot of heat on Imran Khan. How do you see these two things? At the same time, Pakistan is struggling with its own other problem, economic problems.
Well, I think this whole thing is really putting a pressure on the military and the traditional infrastructure in Pakistan, because Imran Khan was very much a populist candidate. I don't think either many of the Middle Eastern states and traditional allies of Pakistan or the US were particularly fond of his policies, which were very overtly pro Russian and pro China, but he was also clever in trying to make it appear as if he was truly a visionary, that he was allegedly open to brokering some sort of relation with Israel. Not necessarily true, but he created this appearance of that, and and that he was basically going against some of the traditional Pakistani tropes. So that made him interesting, and that garnered a lot of popular support. And I think the way the military is handling it with the fabricating cases, well, there's also a real case to be made that for corruption, but it's very obvious that a lot of it is essentially political opposition and not just straight through prosecution of um, corruption. Otherwise, the entire government would be in prison. I think that is
Right.
actually making the case worse and making the government look weak and unable to cope with these challenges, and they don't have a vision of their own to supplant his, so they're going that route. And that is not to defend anything Imran Khan stands for. I personally don't think he would be any better in any way than the current regime, if not possibly even worse. But I do think that the sort of response, this really anemic response by the current government is not doing them any favors and will lead to greater and greater instability internally, and that will breed additional security problems, of course. And I think one byproduct of this internal bickering is the fact that they're neither willing nor able to crack down on extremist ideology, and that extremist ideology ends up being exported abroad via migrants, or even second generation individuals who get radicalized in mosques or online or through the family environment or some combination of these factors, as we have seen with this Canadian Pakistani national. And Canada, for its own part, has been long since warned about better rating of immigrants and generally networks and communities it works with, but has also ignored this ideological element, which is now presenting a threat not just in Canada, but as you know, in New York, where this guy was planning to attack the Jewish communities. What is it?
Absolutely.
What does a Pakistani in Canada need to do in New York? Why did he have to go to New York? Because he felt that's where he had the chance to kill the most people, and it's actually kind of frightening if you think about it.
Right, right. With this, it's a wrap on the a wrap for this edition of the world according to Irina Shukerman on the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. Stay tuned for more insightful perspectives for Irina on global politics. See you all very soon.
Thank you so much.